Hey everyone, and welcome to our explainer. Today, we are diving into the reign of one of Judah's most infamous leaders, King Ahaz. Now, his story isn't just some dusty piece of ancient history, it's a really powerful case study in leadership, faith, and what happens when someone in power chooses to go down a very, very dark path.
So let me just start with this question. It's a heavy one, for sure, but it's at the absolute heart of this story. The account of King Ahaz really digs into what unfolds when a leader who has every chance to do good consciously and deliberately chooses the exact opposite.
All right, let's get into it. Our story kicks off right at the beginning of Ahaz's 16-year reign. And this wasn't some slow slide into corruption. The source material makes it crystal clear that right out of the gate, Ahaz made some truly shocking choices. Now, what's so important to see here is the contrast. Ahaz wasn't flying blind. He had amazing examples to follow. I mean, his own ancestor, King David, was the gold standard for a king who tried to do what was right. But Ahaz, he actively rejected that whole legacy. It's like he had the blueprint for a righteous kingdom, and he just chose to tear it up. And he didn't just ignore his heritage. He went all in on the very things God had condemned. He started making idols to the Baals. He got into all the pagan rituals, sacrificing on hills and under trees. But then, and this is truly horrifying, he practiced the worship of Molech, which involved burning his own children as offerings. These were the exact abominations that God had judged other nations for centuries earlier. Ahaz was knowingly leading his own people down that same tragic road. So what do you think happens when a king drags his nation into that kind of darkness? Well, the story shifts immediately from Ahaz's choices to the consequences. The kingdom of Judah starts to face one military disaster after another, and the text is very, very clear about why. And this right here is the absolute key. The defeats Judah suffered weren't because of bad strategy or just plain bad luck. The source says it explicitly. The Lord, his God, delivered him into the hands of his enemies. This was divine judgment, plain and simple. It was a direct consequence of Ahaz and his people turning their backs on God. It couldn't be any clearer. And the scale of this judgment was just staggering. In a single day of fighting against their northern neighbors, the Kingdom of Israel, 120,000 of Judah's best soldiers were killed, and the text calls them valiant men. This was a catastrophic blow to the entire nation. But the horror didn't stop with the army. The Israelites also captured 200,000 civilians, women, sons, and daughters, and planned to make them all slaves. Think about that. An entire generation was about to be lost, not to some foreign empire, but to their own relatives. The human cost is just impossible to imagine. Just when it seems like all hope is lost, God steps in, but in a way nobody could have expected. He doesn't send an army or a miracle to free the captives. No, he sends one man, a prophet, with a message for the winners. So this prophet, his name is Oded, and he walks right up to the victorious Israelite army. He doesn't congratulate them. Instead, he hits them with this stunning rebuke. He confirms that yes, God let them win because Judah had sinned, but he accuses them of carrying out the slaughter with a rage so out of control that it reaches up to heaven. And this is the core of his argument. Oded basically holds up a mirror to the victors and asks them, hey, what about you? Are you guys blameless in all this? He warns them that if they go through with enslaving their own family from Judah, they're just adding to their own pile of guilt before God. And what happens next is just, wow, it's truly remarkable. The leaders of Israel actually listen. Oded's words hit home, and they refuse to let the captives be brought into the city as slaves. Instead, they do this incredible act of mercy. They take the loot they won in the war and use it to clothe the captives. They give them food and water, they tend to their wounds, and then they personally walk all 200,000 of them back home. It's an unbelievable moment of repentance. Okay, so you'd think, right, after a crushing defeat followed by the miraculous, merciful return of 200,000 of your people, you'd think King Ahaz would get the message. But he learns absolutely nothing. Instead of turning back to God, he just doubles down on his faithlessness. So let's just trace his logic here, because it's pretty wild. Judah is still getting attacked by other enemies. But instead of seeing this as a wake-up call from God, Ahaz just ignores the lesson. He decides his only hope is to team up with the massive Assyrian Empire. And to buy their help, he strips all the treasures out of God's temple and his own palace to send as a giant bribe. And here is the totally predictable, tragic result. The king of Assyria happily takes the bribe, but the help never shows up. Actually, it's worse than that. The text says the Assyrian king distressed him, but did not assist him. So Ahaz sold out his kingdom and desecrated the temple for an alliance that only made things worse. His brilliant plan was a complete and total failure. This brings us to the final dark chapter of Ahaz's reign. All his failed plans and all the trouble he's in don't lead to some moment of clarity. Nope. Instead, they push him into his most extreme acts of rebellion against God yet. You know, what's so fascinating here is the little bit of commentary from the author. It's not just stating a fact, it's an indictment. The crisis didn't humble Ahaz, it just made him worse. That phrase, "This is that King Ahaz," it's like a permanent stamp of shame, defining his entire legacy by how he rebelled when things got tough.
At this point, his logic just goes completely off the rails. He decides to start sacrificing to the gods of Damascus, thinking, hey, their gods beat my army, so they must be stronger. Then, in his final act of defiance, he takes all the sacred items from God's temple, chops them into pieces, and then physically shuts them indoors, literally ending the official worship of the Lord in the nation. After that, he builds his own pagan altars all over Jerusalem. He didn't just forget God, he tried to erase him.
So, after 16 years of chaos and apostasy, Ahaz finally dies. But even in death, the dishonor follows him. He's buried in Jerusalem, sure, but the text makes a special point of saying he was not brought into the royal tombs of the kings. His legacy was so toxic, he was denied the final honor of being buried with his ancestors. And that's where this story leaves us. The account of Ahaz is such a powerful cautionary tale. It shows that pressure and crisis don't automatically make a leader better. Sometimes they just harden their worst impulses. It really forces us to ask, when faced with failure and distress, what foundation do our leaders, or even we ourselves, turn to for help? It's a question that is just as important today as it was thousands of years ago.